the topic that I wanted to discuss, and that is getting the word out, alerting. And some people think that when you use the word alerting, you mean EAS. That's only part of it. The FCC has its rules, its mandates. The FEMA has its part in this. And what about the stations? What about the individual groups out in the field? So that's what I'd like to talk about today, because there are several reasons for us to consider what can be done, what should be done, and whether, I mean, let's be realistic. We're not going to get somebody to call the FCC and a notice of proposed rulemaking comes out and a committee is put together to redesign to the next version. So we had EBS, then EAS, ECS, I don't know, something. It isn't going to happen. There's too much politics and too much bureaucratic inertia. So the question becomes for your station, for your operation, your company, what can you do? What should you do? I mean, we can refer to the hurricane in Carolina. We can talk about the fires in Los Angeles. And there were about, I read in one place, 88 different agencies involved in responding to the LA fires. So even if you did want to use EAS, who's going to shepherd that? Who's going to be in charge of giving clear information to the public, especially when these agencies often fight among themselves? Now, because we have Alan with us, Al Kenyon, let me start with you. Your place in this chain is to make sure that the presidential alerts happen. And that's really your core mission, isn't it? Uh-oh.
Yes, it is. Um, that sorry, I just had to uncover things. Yeah, the core mission and the reason why EAS exists is for it's for continuity. It's for um, fulfillment of CFR 47 part some no CFR. Hey, growing old as hell. I used to know where to cite the Communications Act. Um, And I think it's probably a fairly odd interpretation of the Communications Act, the way technology is developed, but um, it allowed for the president to access the telecommunications infrastructure of the country. Um, I think one of the ingredients was when war was declared. Well, we're not at war, except with ourselves, perhaps. Um, And and then more recently in the 60s or so, they started looking at it and saying, well, we have this infrastructure. Why don't we make it available for use um, by state and local authorities? So, and the broadcast industry said, yeah, we would like to be useful. We'd like to serve the public interest. Like I said, it was a long time ago. Um, and EAS was developed as a very basic, well, actually, yeah, EBS was developed as a very basic functionality. Um, as time went by, technology moved forward. Operators started becoming scarce, and automation started rearing its ugly head, and the emergency system evolved to become EAS, which allowed for automation of a sort um, through boxes and through use of a was it 52.4 or something like that baud data header, which is commonly known as duck farts or something equally obnoxious to provide the signaling information over the air. and it remained a main channel distribution scheme.
That's right.
I don't know that a main channel distribution scheme for local events is appropriate or necessary anymore. The industry is asking whether or not we need to have boxes to do it. There, I see who's on the call. The FCC can regulate the specs of the tones and the frequency shift and things like that. And that could be very difficult to maintain if you put it in software of you load your software into a fine machine or a not so fine machine, and if it depends on the timing of the internals and stuff like that. So there are a whole bunch of questions to ask about what's the next generation of EAS going to look like? Is it going to be are they going to be software-based systems? Is it going to be just part of the audio processing chain? Could it possibly be, oh, my box from Telos or my box from whoever, or my automation system, it's just a module that runs in there? Yeah, well, the folks who were promoting that, certain aspects of it look good, certain aspects of it look interesting, but trying to do the whole thing and do it properly is going to involve a little bit more than you're thinking about. So it could be a challenge, particularly when the standards which are again hardware based, are applied. I don't know how you'd get from one place to the other. Um, there are various proponents of different things, but I don't know that anybody's come up with a real solid solution.
No, each one has its own answer. In the Hurricane Helena, for instance, which mirrored a lot of other hurricanes, a couple of radio stations. They went 24/7. The staff was actually living in the building pretty much because their homes were demolished, and they stayed on with the information.
Mm-hmm.
In Los Angeles, there were several stations that were very much keying into the news aspect, but getting the news, that's one of the big problems. The um, WEA, which is not your responsibility, but the WEA went off screwy. 3 a.m, it told them to evacuate Los Angeles County. And that has been one of the big problems with EAS as well, is when the radio stations relinquish control to the local emergency managers, fake or mistyped words or buttons or whatever send off alerts that alarm people. And
Yeah, regarding the LA fires, the alert that went countywide, I suspect there was alert fatigue not only on the part of the residents, but also on the part of the small staff that was sending out the alerts. I don't know that anybody really had uh, any organization really allowed for um, enough people with training and skill to address a situation that intense for that long. Um, there may have been some quirks with the software that allowed them to click past where they should have without getting a banner. The software vendor that was being used by LA County immediately did a rewrite on their software. So now if you try and send a wireless emergency alert without including a geo-targeting polygon, big red letters come up on the screen and say, "Do you really want to do this? It's going to go county-wide." Would that have made a difference? Maybe, maybe not. But I like to phrase it as they were composing an alert and it accidentally was released before they were able to attach a geo-targeting polygon to it. Just probably kind of what happened. If you look at the alerting history in the area, within 24 hours, there are about 100 WEA messages, most of them issued by LA County, for a very, very rapidly changing situation. that's a tremendous amount of pressure on the alert originators.
It is. And a
So,
lot of people turned off their phones.
yeah. Now, we also, that situation later on became even more interesting when you consider we've seen little oddities with WEA here and there. Generally, it's in less populated areas or rural areas or things like that. When you've got a population density like you have in LA County, you have the number of cell sites serving that population like you have there, and you have a massive situation like the wildfires. It puts a tremendous amount of stress on the system, and odd things that are going to show up will show up. Oh, nobody's really confirmed, but the impression is that wireless emergency alerts were being broadcast by cell sites. I hate it when they call them towers because cell sites right now they're on the side of the elevator penthouse of the building you're in. They're on phone poles. They're all kinds of places. But when the cell sites, yeah, the fake swirls are my favorite. When a cell site with some versions of software loses power, it just stops working. And when it comes back up, it picks up where it left off and says, "Oh, I was sending this message. I'm going to keep sending it." Many years ago, 7 or 8 years ago in Florida, we had noted that situation when tornadoes and things were spun out of a hurricane coming across the Florida Panhandle, and 2 days later, the cell sites came back up and started broadcasting a flash flood warning. Of course, now it was sunny, so it wasn't quite as critical as the is get out, you're going to die, and when there's fire and smoke in the area. We worked with the carrier. They went to their vendor and they had the vendor put in a routine, so when it powers back up after a non-requested shutdown, it clears that register. Well, that was 7 or 8 years ago. A lot of different versions of hardware and software since then. I think somebody forgot that routine in some of those boxes.
Could be very, very true. And the other aspect of that, you mentioned the word polygon. And this is an area which a lot of folks have become very, how shall we say, cynical. Now, again, starting with what you folks are doing is basically around the president and a national message. When the Weather Service decides that there's going to be a tornado or a major storm, severe storm, and they send out these polygons, the first thing is the polygons are not compatible with your software. So they only come out in the WEAs. And secondly, the polygons don't really help a whole lot for broadcasters who can't suddenly say, well, we'll just send our signal to the southwest. It doesn't work that way. But you can't get anywhere with the Weather Service because they're in their silo and that's what they do. So the question becomes for the stations, how do you parcel this? How do you deal with the weather alerts and how they come in? And I'm going to call on Adam Jones, who's with us this afternoon. Adam is part of the DASDEC empire. And you guys have, over the last 12 years, let's say, 14 years, have really changed your software dramatically in the capabilities that you can filter out things, you can attach files, whether they be in one language or several, to an alert. You could even attach a commercial to it for that matter. And here we come to this point where polygons and partial county alerting has come into play. And do you folks think about that at all? Is it having an impact on you?
Yeah, we actually discuss that quite often, Barry, but I want to defer my answer to Bill and Ed, who have been in this significantly longer, and I know are biting their fingernails in anticipation of giving a better answer than what I would give. So I will defer over to them because they are both on the call listening as well.
Oh, good, good. I see Bill. I don't see Ed yet, but carry
I'm
on.
lurking. This is Ed. I'm lurking in the background without a camera
Hello, lurker.
on. Actually, make it brief. I'm much more interested in hearing Al's comments on all this stuff. But for EAS, it's a one-to-many solution. It doesn't matter whether you're targeting a polygon. There are no receivers in EAS per se. Not like a cell phone is a receiver. Everybody in your coverage area gets the alert. So, translating, using FIPS, using sub-county FIPS, very, very relevant for targeting, more micro-targeting, somewhat more micro-targeting than a FIPS code in the case of extended FIPS. But polygons and EAS don't really match up. We are looking at polygons for next-gen broadcast technologies, where the receivers may have some form of geo-awareness. ATSC3, I think most of you know we're pretty hyperactive with ATSC3. We're looking more at HD radio and whether the receivers with any form of geo-awareness. In that case, our retransmission of polygon coordinates or lat long circle coordinates to a receiver as data becomes much more interesting. So we operate in a little bit of a different world. We're not just an EAS box. We're a content management system, and one route. I think Stephen, your audio's on. One route of alert information we're sending out is legacy EAS. Another route, several other routes include data-based messaging in ATSC 3.0 and HD radio, over-the-top television. Again, where the I don't know, Bill, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, Ed, you're at the top of the pyramid, so to speak. You sit on these committees, CISRIC and the other committees that are theoretically laying out where EAS is going. So I don't know if you want to tell me that you have a better view on these things than we do. But is EAS, should broadcasters rely on EAS to the point that they've turned, as Al said, they've turned on the automation system and walked away, or should there be an effort to get stations to do more in terms of having more staff on duty all the time?
Wow. I've done a lot of presentations over just in January on that very topic. Really, EAS. This ties in the whole other topic about the relevance of broadcast in general.
Would you say EAS is passé for broadcast?
Absolutely not.
No.
I mean, it can be improved, and we could talk. I'll turn to Bill in a moment and talk about different ways of improving EAS. But Al on the call, FEMA is giving broadcasters relevant, targeted information, compelling content that can draw eyeballs and eardrums back to broadcast. Let's face it, it's a vicious circle. People don't listen to radio and TV as much as they did before. You can argue these are dying media. Why? Because the more compelling content is on other media in a different form factor, streaming. How do you drag these consumers back to this broadcast media with relevant, compelling content, even if it's in a flash environment such as an emergency situation. So yes, EAS is relevant. That's the bell ringer. Emergency managers complain that either people don't listen to radio and TV anymore, which is BS. At least 20 to 23% of the population is on radio and TV, especially the more economically disadvantaged ones. That is a ludicrous claim that we really need to encourage emergency managers to stop relying only on WEA. The second part is usage of EAS itself. It's a bell ringer to go somewhere else to get more information. Where is that somewhere else? Radio and TV.
It should be. It should be, because every time we talk about this, words reverse 911 come up into play, or other similar schemes. And as I think Al mentioned, when the fire comes through, or when the batteries run down on the cell site, there's no more internet. The internet's gone. The 911 is gone. Paradise, California fire, and the sheriff's department was going to use reverse 911. Well, first of all, and you don't have to raise your hands, but I'm going to guess that a good many of you, if not all of you, do not answer phone calls that do not tell you who's calling, or that your cell service, like mine, often puts the word scam likely, and that kind of reduces your desire to answer a call. And so how do you get information out without broadcast?
Well,
Really?
I want to turn your question back to the first part of your question, which was, I'm supposedly at the top of the pyramid. I'm really not, but I'm involved in a lot of committees. And I respectfully defer to Al, because he's FEMA. But from what I've heard in general, is a much greater emphasis in this current group managing FEMA IPAWS in broadcast media, in addition to WEA. So, I did an SBE webinar where I said, for a couple of years, it was all internet, WEA. And emergency managers are absolutely fixated on only the WEA method of sending alerts in a lot of jurisdictions. I think that this group in IPAWS is going to give additional weight to legacy broadcast media, but also there is the issue of the reality that 80%, 70-80% of American consumers are in the silo of streaming media. If you're on Pandora and Amazon Prime, how the heck do we get an emergency message to them? I leave that rhetorically, but I see Al just popped on his video.
I think in some areas, if you're on Amazon and you're getting it through your cable service, you're going to get the EAS that way, and it may interrupt your movie or your I Love Lucy. Pierre, I see your hand is up. Would you want to kick in here?
Yeah, so in the last 3 weeks, we've lost our fiber connection. We had a blizzard that blew out the power to my AM site for 3 days. And after, the AM power issue wasn't a big deal. I just rolled everything to our low power FM for town. And it took days to figure out the power issue. But when the fiber optic link that we have that goes north to the North Slope and comes around the coast got cut again with ice scour, which happened last year, everything went crazy. Because everybody had rolled onto the fiber, they had kind of just got off all their satellite links. So it took them 24 hours to ramp up, maybe even 36 hours to ramp up all their satellite backup stuff that they had just left idle since last year. So we had the Starlink, and believe it or not, we still have POTS lines at the radio station. No cell service was working for about 24 hours. So we were on POTS, and people were calling in like crazy, and we're passing messages along. And we answer the phone for anybody. We get nuts every once in a while, but for us here, we're a public service organization. We play all kinds of music and all that stuff. And you're a politician, you can come in and give your opinion. But for 24 hours, we were the only thing in town, that had current connection to news and weather and all that stuff.
Interesting. Ed,
Barry, I'd like to if I can, I want to kind of add a little bit, as Ed pointed out, kind of a description. First and foremost, Ed uses this term, and I really think it's very important to understand that EAS as a service is a bell ringer. It's not the constant informational type of thing, but you need something that gives that alert. And then again, it's that emergency alert context that's very, very important. It's not meant, and if you really look at it, EAS is a yell. You're yelling all the time. So it's not one of the things that you want to do. You want to yell to get people's attention, to have them act on something. You want to give them actionable information when you do yell, that you're yelling for a real purpose and things like that. And then there's other sides of this, which is informational. What's information about that emergency, or a continuing updates about some other things like that. But you're not always wanting to yell. I think part of the thing that we also have, and Al spoke to this earlier too, about this context of wanting to do, software variations of this thing. One of the things that's so important around this particular service that is provided is, if I were an emergency manager, I think it is folly to always rely on only one way of sending an alert. I want to have multiple arrows in my quiver, and I want to be able to shoot them all. And I want to shoot them simultaneously, because not every circuit is going to be live. Not every transport mechanism is going to be working. And to Pierre's thing, they lost the fiber. What worked? And if you have services, and this is the idea with all the folks on here looking at redundancies, types of things that you want to do. You don't want to have a system that is only one particular thing. And on those really bad days, you're just kind of said it, when you lose fiber connectivity or anything else, or as Al pointed out, you're way beyond the alert thing, but you've cached the alert information. It makes no sense. You brought up the other things about phones. If they got a cell phone, the cell site is out. The other things that you've got. How many people have an actual wired phone anymore? I mean, the batteries in the phone are going to die. But it's one of the things that you might have a POTS line, but you still have like my wireless phone on my POTS line. When the battery goes out in that, I've got zero. So having a wired phone, again, more of these things that we can do. I think it's also very, very important to recognize that this group represents something that nobody else can do. And that's the fact that they can appeal, if you will, if they can make a message available to a broad audience, and they can do it in a way that is extremely efficient. I don't have to worry about one bit set wrong that's not going to work. I don't have to worry about situations of, I've got too many subscribers. Did anyone, watch the Netflix situation when they tried to do a live event and all of a sudden it crashed? What? They got too many users. The streaming systems too are built with a certain capacity idea. The beautiful thing about broadcast is it doesn't have a capacity problem. One person listening, 1 million people listening, it doesn't have a problem. And it gets that signal out, and it's very, very important. I don't want to take too much time, but I do also want to add, there are ways that we've looked at to improve EAS. Things like adding additional data. Some of the stuff, quite frankly, we've been thwarted by, there's all these samey receivers out in the world, the guys that have built the weather receivers, you don't want to disrupt them. Fine. We've come up with means and mechanisms that we've tried to advance in the industry, that we could add some extra data, some other things in there, another little burp of data that could provide additional things like more targeted stuff, timestamp. The EAS protocol doesn't have a year in it. Why wouldn't we add a year as part of the protocol? We can do things around this if we're given some opportunity and people don't just tamp it down. But I think EAS as an alert, as a bell ringer, as that yell, is a super critical thing that broadcasters can do in spades over anybody else. And to let that out of your control or to downplay it is at your own loss. I think it's a terrible thing to not leverage that.
Oh, absolutely agreed. Absolutely agreed.
Now, how can it be a bell ringer when the radio is off? People don't listen to radio anymore at home. So, like in Los Angeles, friends of mine were notified by their cell phones. At 3 in the morning, radios were not on. And if the radio was on, you were probably living in your car. Okay, so I don't understand this bell ringer first alert part. It
The whole
requires
system.
that the radio be on.
Rich, it's the whole system that we're talking about. It can't be just broadcast anymore. Not in a world where the certain generation lives with their noses pointed at their cell phone pretty much most all day.
Absolutely, yes.
Rich, to that point, it's kind of interesting if I can. In the ATSC3 specification, there is a thing that's called the wake-up bits that a modern receiver could be activated, but it's built into the ATSC3 standard that if they wanted to, that's something that is invoked. Again, the idea is the fact that the radio may be off, but again, that's why I've got more arrows in my quiver. Don't just rely on any one particular channel.
Ed, let me ask you this question, if you can, again, from your point of view. Paul just wrote on the chat, FM receivers and cell phones should be a mandate. Is that possible? Or have we moved beyond where that could be done?
I think that's a dead issue. FM chips generally require the cord of the headset as an antenna, and that's gone. Now we're using Bluetooth for earpieces, so I think that's a moot point. I think I think the proponents of that were too late with that proposal. Quite honestly.
If you guys look at comm systems, has like a domino effect. What fails first? What fails second? What hangs on last? And generally, it's some poor schmuck like us guys at a transmitter site keeping that radio running, no matter what. Because, I mean, here we use VHF marine radios to communicate. It used to be CBs, because there were no phones here when I first moved here. There was one in each village. People used CBs back then to talk between villages. Then they went to marine VHF. So we have both those. I have a CB and I have a marine VHF sitting here at the radio station.
Similarly, Mike Lang there just wrote an article. It's here on the, if you look on the front page of the BDR, and it has to do with the fact that hams provide a lot of information. Of course, there has to be somebody to listen to the hams or some way for them to get that information to the broadcast community or weather community. And that's something that hasn't been fully worked out. But as Pierre says, you just can't rely on one way. Bill's right. A lot of arrows in the quiver.
A lot of arrows in the quiver. Look, I want to bounce a question back to Al Kenyon, but I'd say, look, in response to what Rich Wood said, we're getting to the point of no return. That you still have to have that Wall Street perspective. Just cash in on the spectrum, get radio and TV off the air, use that for wireless data broadcast. Dead industries, nobody uses it, not even used for EAS anymore. That's kind of the dangerous position I hear a lot of broadcasters taking, that we don't want to do EAS, it's a bother, it's nonsense, it's intrusive. I think there are ways to improve EAS distribution, but to concede the point that, it's useless in the home or what have you, is just basically putting a gun to your head saying, I'm done with we're done with the industry. I'm taking an absolute position just to be contentious, but that's, increasing parts of the finance world looking at this industry as basically, dead men walking. But for Al, I just went on a detour and actually was hoping, not to put Al on a spot, but I threw out there that iPause is looking at stuff. That's me, in my opinion. I'd rather, if Al could speak to the importance of, broadcast, even in today's fixated streaming world, that might be helpful. Educational.
iPause is certainly putting a renewed emphasis on EAS, and broadcast. I don't know whether you know the management that we had before and the management we have now. The IPAWS division director retired at the end of last year, or a full year ago now, and Manny Centino was appointed director as his replacement. Manny has a broadcasting background. He has a background in manufacturing electronic equipment as well. He did a lot of the promotions for 360 systems. If anybody remembers those boxes. He is doing everything he can to restore the relevance of EAS and bring a renewed focus on it. I don't know exactly how it's going to work out, given that we have the federal government's operating under a continuing resolution that expires sometime in late March, and NEB is in early April. We can't book travel until after we get funding for that period, but we currently have I think 30 by 40 foot booth space in the NAB exhibit hall, and we're going to be hosting a number of sessions discussing EAS and what the industry can bring to the table as far as being more relevant in more difficult and challenging situations. We continue to reach out to alerting authorities and talk to them about it, but we seem to be running out of chickens and running out of eggs in broadcast, because there are a number of broadcast stations and TV stations that don't carry anything other than required EAS messages.
That's a real problem. That's a real problem.
So if alerting authorities want to send a message out using particular event codes, I advise them to talk to their local broadcasters, emphasizing that part of it is a little bit like a game of catch. If you're going to throw the ball, nobody's going to catch it. Why bother? And you also need to make sure that the folks on the catching end are assured that there's going to be a quality of that pitch. If
Al,
it's
there's a impression in the industry that the FEMA and the FCC do not talk with each other. I don't know how much you can say, but I'll just raise this issue, and I'll bet you Bill has something to say. As a perfect example, DASDEC came up with the arrangement to pull your CAP audio down, if it's there, immediately to run an alert. The FCC comes in and says, what? You have to wait 2 minutes or 5 minutes to see if there's CAP audio. And in that case, your alert has to sit there and wait.
Yeah, it's a lack of understanding. I don't know how many of you have to address groups of lawyers in your day-to-day life, but that's what the FCC is. And they change lawyers. Once we get somebody that has a fair understanding of how things work, we finally got somebody up to speed. Greg Cook, and he retired. I don't know what that word stands for, but I don't want to buy into it. He started understanding some of the technical issues and tried to phrase it in ways that the rest of the staff over there would understand, but he's not there anymore. Then there are the challenges of dealing with upper management. We had Antoine did not really want to our former director did not really want to joust with the FCC too much, and there's upper level appointments in FEMA whose positions are now open, really deferred to to the folks at the FCC, their equivalent over at the FCC, way too much, because we really wanted to tell them how the cow ate the cabbage, and no, it's not. We weren't allowed to do that. We had to treat them with kid gloves. So hopefully we'll be able to have more open discussions where we can let the facts speak for themselves instead of trying to couch it so it sounds nice and nobody gets offended as we go forward. But yeah, we talk to each other. We also talk at each other. We also talk over each other.
Yeah, the word immediately is one of the sore points that I have, that the commission requires certain things to be done immediately. And yet at the same time, they're saying you have to wait. And
Yeah,
it frustrates people like Bill and Adam and Ed.
indeed. And we don't agree with many of the things that they put out. We don't publicly disagree with them, but there's on those occasions when they'll let us see things ahead of time, we will certainly throw our comments back to them and explain why this might be a bad idea. Lately, there have been some things that have come through the commission, and we found out about it at the same time everybody else has when they published it. That's not a really good way to go forward. We have some of the technical expertise. We don't have all of it, but we try and listen to industry, try to listen to folks like many of the folks who are gathered on the call here to try and come up with better ways to do things. It's difficult to match the real world and the regulatory environment that they think they've structured. There's kind of they don't quite phase together. They don't link up too well.
And then after you have that, you have the emergency managers out in the field who are not required to cooperate at all with the EAS.
Yeah.
Now you do training for EMs. I see it mentioned from time to time in your press releases and on your website. How do you feel? Is there progress here in reducing the number of failed tests or alerts?
We're getting more aggressive about training, and one of the aspects of training that Manny has brought about, and he kind of forced some things in Hawaii. We did some training in Hawaii and several levels of emergency management there. Said, oh well, we don't want to show up. Manny went to the mayor of Honolulu. The mayor of Honolulu ordered his emergency manager to show up. And that kind of embarrassed other folks to showing up. We're trying to involve the dreaded management side of things.
And that works in radio too. Management has got to get involved.
That's exactly where I was going to go. Many managers will heed the advice of a program director or distant program consultant or whoever that says, shut all that stuff off. We don't need it. It just interrupts the program flow. It interrupts the commercial flow.
Well, let's just bring Rich Wood
keeping
back
your audience
in.
alive used to be a qualification for being a broadcaster.
Exactly.
It doesn't seem to be now.
Let's bring Rich Wood, a big-time program director. And let's hear what he has to say about letting people save themselves. Rich?
I don't see him on his camera. I think what I said made him mad.
You think he
But-
dropped off or?
Yeah, I'm back.
Oh, there you are.
Okay, I was on a phone call, so
that
the
happens.
question.
So, big-time program director.
Okay.
What was your instruction at your station when it came to relaying EAS messages or weather reports or other things that might relate to the safety of your audience?
Actually, that was not mine. That would have been, particularly at WOR, that was the news department. I wasn't the program director of WOR. I ran the network, the radio network.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't recall, other than that glorious first experiment, us carrying many of those alerts. And the issue that I have is the even in New York, I mean, big markets. If you're watching a press conference, you're going to see a lot of microphones. And you're also going to see a lot of people carrying microphones with mic flags. Very often, those are interns with microphones connected to absolutely nothing. There are no people on the street gathering news, other than, the few remaining news stations. Like in New York, about the only one would be WINS. Even at WR, we didn't have people on the streets. So, that's market number one. I think Los Angeles is a little bit more news oriented than New York. Lots of certainly more helicopters and that sort of thing. But I like the idea of more people. There's got to be somebody there. As I mentioned in the chat, the in my market, a news talk means someone ripping and reading news and carrying George Newery automated overnight. Many,
Ripping and reading.
yes.
There's a teletype machine still running.
Well, we call it rip and read, even though it's on a screen.
Yeah, I'd like to see them rip the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But see, the real issue is there's nobody home. And, I would love to see, you mentioned ham radio. I'm a member of Skywarn. That's a wonderful thing in my market. There's so many people actually driving around, reporting on, particularly weather events. And I think I mentioned this a few weeks ago, and somebody said, "Well, you can't rely on ham radio." So that's true. But if you are a ham, you're one step closer to knowing what's going on. Like in my market, forget about it. There is nobody. Very few stations. I don't know of any station in my market, which is Western Massachusetts, that has a news department. And the same is true in New York. Very few. Even 9/11, they plugged into TV audio.
Well, this is definitely an attrition issue. In the news this week was one group that decided to fire all their local weather people and use a national service instead until the listeners complained. So part of it is your audience, if they're really concerned. Of course, if you are turning them off with 10 spots in a row all the time, maybe they don't care whether you have a news department or not.
Who's running 10 spots?
Heck of a
Did
lot.
they cut down?
All right. What about LPFMs? Would LPFMs be a good source in an emergency? Certainly, they could be much more targeted.
Well, I mean, Barry, let me jump in for a second. A lot of the conversation in radio really sparks back to old school technologies. Thinking of broadcast as a linear, radio as a linear media, audio only. With HD radio and ATSC3, and even with ATSC1, there is the ability to send out information out of band, text, even graphical format. If you were at NAB, you saw what we did with HD radio and with graphics and learning over HD radio. Whether you're an LPFM or full power FM, you have the assets there, or low power TV or full power TV. You have the ability to get information out to people in a whole variety of manner. Now with ATSC3 AC radio, more like an OTT or an IPTV provider than ever before. I'd also note that reporting isn't necessarily dead; it's migrated. So, okay, the quality of journalism has diminished significantly, but these guys are still on things like patch and local news services instead of radio, even if it's on an ad hoc or voluntary basis. Still is content there in some markets that we can aggregated leverage to bring this news into the broadcast media or ancillary services like the pieces I'm talking about. I mean, let me stop there. But I'd strongly recommend, Barry, at some point in the future, you do a BDR and review, next gen technologies for radio and TV, because the tech is there to do a lot more and potentially drag consumers back to broadcast media. I think there's just not a whole lot of understanding or buy-in by management of
Yeah.
what can be done, especially with EAS.
And to a degree, that's the problem with this group where I say we, sure, Rich is in programming and there's other folks here as well, but we're largely a technical group. I think it can be said. And EAS was dumped on the tech guys. There's no other way to say it because they didn't want to do it. The programmers didn't want to put it on the air. And yet, when you talk about ATSC3, Ed, we've had Dana on a couple of times, and he showed us how his transmitter is completely filled, the whole bandwidth, with the local network stations.
Mhm.
There's no room for the 100 channels of radio that he could be putting out. And this is true in a number of places. There is one lighthouse station, and there is the major networks, and there isn't a lot more.
But that's
So, I mean,
going to be until ATSC1 goes away.
Really?
And the other thing is, as far as alerting is concerned, how many people and how long will it take for people to get the receivers that will turn on automatically? And how many people have that wonderful, creative, and amazing iBuzz, to deliver this stuff?
well,
It's requiring people to, spend quite a bit of money, to upgrade receivers. And I don't believe they're going to do that.
well, two points to that. One, there are approximately 10 million ATSC3 ready receivers, television sets already in the market. Whether consumers know they're ATSC3 ready or not is a different point. The marketing around ATSC3 has been a disaster. Flat out, can't deny that. I'm on the board of directors of ATSC. I'm flat out saying there has been a massive communications gap between where the technology is, where the broadcasters are deploying, and the understanding of that in the marketplace. The second thing is you don't have to necessarily buy an entirely new TV. You can get an ATSC3 set-top box, a small box, smaller than a cable TV box, for anywhere between $100 and $300, depending on whether you want it to be DVR enabled, etc. Again, nobody knows this stuff exists, but there are. You go on Amazon and they're there. That's again marketing, communications. I know some people have marketing, think marketing is a sale. That's about market education, and there's a big problem there. The last thing I want to blurt out is what we used to call making lemonade out of lemons. The weather company has made an enormous business out of monetizing urgent, emergency, and weather information. The fact that the broadcast industry had never done that and hasn't organized around that, especially now with next gen technology to come out, boggles my mind, quite honestly. Al's on the phone so good he doesn't have to hear me say this, but monetizing EAS, urgent information that can be tagged to advertising, to targeted advertising, targeted information. It's monetizable. Yet the tech is there. We've been advocating it for almost a decade now. Zero traction because you know what? We hate EAS and we're going to just fight and push back and dig in our heels and leave cash on the table. It's about as crass and blunt as I could put it, but I'll stop there.
Well, I bought an ATSC3 set-top box, and I sent it back. It offered me nothing more than what I already have with an ATSC1 receiver. Maybe it's too early.
That's true, Rich. I mean, one of the things around it is that depending on when you purchased it, because now you're starting to see some of those things coming out in ATSC3 where the content is catching up. HDR, high dynamic range color is substantial improvement over ATSC1. When you see those kinds of things where the programming, and it is a case of the content catching up with the technology. So notwithstanding, it depends on your display element, whether it can support HDR types of things, and that's one of the things too. There are two different competing standards for HDR, but if the content supports it and you've got it, there are some compelling things. There's more stuff that's available, and I think right now, as mentioned earlier, with these single lighthouse stations, and it's consumed with a lot of stuff, we don't have a lot of the other flexibilities around there. But I think it's available. As Ed points out, a lot of this technology is there. The things that we could do, even on the radio side, leveraging your RDS to put the emergency information in RDS is a simple thing. And guess what? It's out of band. It's not interrupting the audio, but you can put that up there. And this is the thing that I've really looked at for the longest period of time is, being able to put and leave the RDS in play while the alert is active. In other words, it's not just wonk, 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 scream, and then go away. And, if I just came out of the store and I hadn't had a chance to, I missed the alert, but when I turn on my receiver, guess what? The RDS is saying, you're under a tornado watch, pay attention. So again, all of these other little elements and these nuances that we have, it's not just roll over and play dead. This is really an opportunity for us to expand and explore and if you will, from our side, implore everybody to get involved in this thing. I think the big thing that Al mentioned earlier too is this is not one of the things that we should sit back and wait for the FCC to tell us what to do. That is dangerous because they are, the legal rumblings of that. They're not the technology people. We need to go out there and say, hey, this is something that we could do. This is what we could do to improve it. Here's how we can do it, and present that in such a way that they would say, oh, okay, this makes sense, rather than sitting back. I think we've got a great opportunity with a lot of these different technologies and ways to leverage them if we would just take them on and do it.
Well, the set-top box I bought was a Zapper box,
Zapperbox,
which is, sliced bread, of anything. It had 4K, it had HDR, it had all sorts of things, but it didn't offer me at this point, anything more than my 4K ATSC3 TV.
Rich, what market are you in? If you can ask.
I'm sorry,
This is Ed. What DMA, what market are you in?
I'm at the Hartford Springfield market. Actually, it used to be Hartford Springfield. Now they've separated it. It's Springfield, Mass.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in ATSC 3.0. A lot of work. The program guides are just emerging. The value-added service are just emerging. I'd agree with what you said earlier. It is the early days, and I think the broadcasters need to figure out a compelling business model besides just 4K video for for our consumers. Yes, 4K for the Super Bowl, absolutely, but there needs to be more.
And
Say,
if
Rich?
there's one thing that you could ask Al to do, what would that be?
I will ask him face to face next meeting I have. I'll duck that question.
Okay. You don't want to say publicly, because I think there are some things that the FEMA can do.
No. Actually, I will. This may not be a FEMA question, but FEMA has an advisory council, and maybe Al can explain what that new body is up to. But not necessarily for Al, for FEMA, but people have been asking the FCC for the better part of maybe 10 years now to reestablish the National Advisory Council, whether it's National Advisory Council or a National Planning Committee. But why is the rhetorically, why is the FCC so inactive about reinstating the NAC, the National Advisory Council for EAS, and bottlenecking everything through CISRIC, where everything is eclipsed? So, yeah, that's my rhetorical question, not necessarily for Al, but I think there needs to be an interagency planning body for public warning. Maybe what FEMA is doing right now is the beginning of that, but it needs to have some teeth.
Well, I think, you know, that ATSC3 is going to be terrific, you know, once it gets fully implemented. And I was the one who banged on Dana's head to appear here to discuss it.
I banged on his head too.
Say, Rich,
Yes.
when did you discontinue your Zapper box use?
It was about a month ago.
Okay, because I do follow a guy who is big into cord cutting, and he said that, you know, there's recently been new releases to the Zapper box to take away some of the shortcomings of it. Because the other thing was a problem for a lot of the ATSC3 tuners is that the way the broadcasters were carrying the programming, there was encryption on parts of it for I can't remember the shorthand for it, but it's basically the encryption that they were using to prevent you from recording the content. You could watch it live, but you could not record. And it required an internet connection to the boxes to say, you know, yes, you are subscribed, you are okay to record. I think the broadcasters probably are going to eventually have to say, you know what, people are used to their DVRs working, and you're going to have to deal with something to make, you know, if your service is not as good as what they're used to, they just won't bother with it.
Well, I have no problem with the Zapper box. I thought it was a terrific unit. My issue is, you know, what is there? You know, it's the same old. And, you know, too soon.
I mean, right now we only have one RF ATSC3 station on that's carrying all of the network affiliates and stuff, and everybody else is still running their ATSC1 because that's where all the viewers are, the people who are getting their signal by RF. I haven't bothered to buy one because my ATSC1 works okay, and I was really hoping that the people who made the Air TV that works with Sling would come out with one for ATSC3. I'd buy it in a minute, because basically that allows you to, you know, if you're watching your cable channels on Sling, the tuner, the Air TV tuner, inserts them into the same program guide. So you can't, you know, you don't have to worry if this is coming off of an antenna or if it's coming off the internet. You get all of it together. And they just, you know, they have decided, I think Sling is in, as many companies are, they're having their own financial problems because, you know, a lot of these streamers and stuff are just not making money anymore. And so I don't know if there's going to be a new piece of hardware to let me use ATSC3, but I wouldn't mind doing it because there are a couple of ATSC1 stations that I can't get over the air. And ATSC3 is so much more robust, I suspect I would get everything.
Yeah, I think there's a couple points to that. Right now, a lot of stations are relying on, excuse me, relying on lighthouses. One market participant is retransmitting for all the other stations in the market in ETSC3. We need to get off of that. That's a crutch, and we need to figure out how to begin moving industry forward with broadcasters each individually transmitting ATSC3. To Rich's point, once the lighthouse is cleared up or put to bed, and each station has their own ATSC3 transmitter, then at least in 1080 in HD, you could see a station broadcasting a number of channels, a good number of channels, plus audio, plus value-added services. Not everything has to be 4K all the time. I just think we're just, still, unfortunately, in terms of business case for ATSC3, very much at the early days. I've got a Zapper box, I've got a Zinwell. At FEMA, we put in an end-to-end ATSC3 test lab where we also have those two, plus a Vela receiver. And there's a fourth receiver, and I'm blanking out who that is. Somebody's going to yell at me eventually for forgetting them. But, the receivers work well. It is a matter of the content, Rich's point, the content being provided by the broadcaster, not the technology, but getting more sticks on the air, more broad transmission towers on the air, and getting that out, getting those value-added services out in the marketplace. Portability, mobility are huge aspects of ATSC3, not just in-building coverage, but the ability to have television on a portable form factor. And yet, I don't think cell phone chips I'm sorry, ATSC3 chips and cell phones is going to happen anytime in the near future, unfortunately. But if we can get affordable dongles, affordable add-ons, USB add-ons to tablets, to cell phones, and I've seen a couple of them in prototype, that's where all of a sudden TV becomes really interesting. ATSC3, in my mind, becomes really interesting, breaking out of the living room, the big idiot box in the living room, and being in a portable environment, being in a mobile environment, even if that means breaking the walled garden of cell phone carriers. That's the future of television to me. It's no longer the living room. It's mobility and data.
Are the UHF frequencies better received in a cell phone?
It's the transmission standard. It's not so much UHF.
Well, since the antennas would be smaller, I would assume that it would be.
Maybe
not small enough. In my market, if I remember correctly, we had 4 ATSC3 stations. Not sure which one was a lighthouse because they just seemed to be carrying their own subchannels. But there's no lack of ATSC3 signals in this market. Now, Dana's, being the lighthouse for Boston, that's a whole nother thing. But like I said, I think ATSC3 is terrific. No problem with it. It's just no content that's different.
Well, maybe just like streaming and Spotify have caused a breakup in broadcast radio, ATSC3 is fighting the streamers and the packagers on the video content.
I'm just waiting to see what happens when we can have, each station, ATSC3 station, can carry what, 50, 100 radio stations.
Well,
we complain about too many stations on the air. Just imagine what will happen when that happens.
I think that'll be a challenge for radio. I think grabbing back eyeballs from streaming will be a challenge, but it boils down to content. ATSC3 is an amazing technology. The capabilities of it are far beyond any other broadcast standard. Right. Brazil has adopted it. India has adopted it. Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago have de facto adopted it. One more Caribbean company's currently on board. There are 2 test beds in Canada going. And I'll mention Canada. The use case in Canada is not broadcast TV, not linear programming. It's data. Yes, there'll be linear programming, but smart city technology, smart city data. So if you look at a business model for ATSC3, it is broadcast. It possibly is audio services, but it may well be data services in the future, telemetry, automotive software updates and telemetry, smart city data, first responder information, and on and on and on. This is if the business cases can be gelled together, this is a brave new world for television.
Yeah. Ed, you did mention that you need to go here, but before you do, is there anyone in the group here that has a question for Ed before he has to check out? Either press your space bar or alternate A and unmute yourself if you have something to ask Ed.
I'm not sure what the point of one-way data is. Could you tell me?
Well, like telemetry, pushing software updates, pushing information. There's still a pretty broad market for one-way push, digital signage. The industry of the future and always will be digital signage, ticker information. There's individually may not be lucrative business cases, but taken together could represent a steady revenue stream for broadcasters.
Yep. In New York, you'll see all kinds of bus stops with data, displays that are run, remotely.
In fact, I can see the use here in Kotzebue with ATSC3, signage for weather, messages to people, secondary audio channels, I'm all for it.
Another potential use case in public service. I tend to be more focused on public service. That's just my orientation. But education, distance education, MOOC, mass online courses. Kotzebue. I mean, imagine if you could have, a nationwide broadcast or a small sliver of data with Harvard classes out to where you are. All of a sudden, you're getting that kind of MIT, Harvard data, Harvard video classes all the way up in Alaska. I mean, that's a business case that can happen. Not saying this is Ed is as big as it was during the pandemic, but it's something.
So what you're really
Basketball
saying,
games.
what we're getting to, Ed, is kind of where you started in a way and where we started, getting the word out. Broadcasters have the options and will have options, but they need to have content.
Yeah, it's all about content. That's the bottom line. The technology is there. We with other manufacturers have created the standards, have created the technologies to create this broadcast superhighway. Now it's up to broadcasters to figure out how to fill that superhighway with traffic, premium content. What is the next Game of Thrones, and can it be on broadcast TV? Broadcast with DRM and subscriptions, so you don't have your 12-year-old kid watching something they shouldn't be watching on TV. But I mean, that's a whole new horizon for broadcast TV. Now you can have free OTA, premium OTA, multiple channels of OTA. If I look at Pluto TV, which I'm pretty addicted to right now, but there's no reason why the Cops channel couldn't be on even if it's not 1080, it could be 720, but that as a stream of one of a dozen streams just to capture that audience with targeted advertising. That's just on the video side, repurposing content, bringing new content. This is a conversation not for us, but for the management guys who aggregate the programming for these stations. And then there's a whole area of content and data services. How about a really cool always-on weather service? How about, locally tailored information service that draw consumers back to broadcast, where you can't get this cool content streaming or over your cable provider or your streaming provider. Really tailor it to the local market. That's where broadcasters are strongest. Local markets, local information, local advertising, hyper local advertising, and local emergency alerting. That's my pitch. Unfortunately, I have to jump and attend to my next disaster. But that's what I got for a moment.
I appreciate your coming by, Ed. Very good information that I think needs to be filtered into the conversation.
We need to understand that your kid is not watching what he shouldn't watch on TV. He's streaming it.
Bill, are you still with us?
Yes, sir.
You and I
Only for I've got an extra 10 minutes.
You and I had a long conversation recently about some of these things. And I sent you a private chat note, which I hope you saw. And as you folks continue to bring features into the system, I think it's important because as Ed makes the point and you make the point, EAS or alerting of any sort does not have to be a total money drain. It can be an income source.
Yeah, Ed referenced that, and I did a paper at NAB. It has to be now 10 years ago. It was called Lemons into Lemonade. And it really was a case of not, and people would be adverse to say that we're looking to monetize the EAS event. It's not about the information type of thing, but one could easily see that at the end or the conclusion of a particular event that you could append a message on it. So for example, in my early days of doing cable advertising and things like that, we would set up a system such that there was a running contract. So it was whenever there was an empty slot that wasn't filled, I had a contract that would just say, okay, grab this advertiser's place and put it in there. So it was a running type of contract, and it was a catch as catch can type of thing. But the thing that's unique about this is if we had a similar kind of thing, but we tied it to a type of event. Let's the case that I've always used is if I get a hurricane warning right after the hurricane warning, why not run a audio thing that says, stop down to the local hardware store for your hurricane supplies, get water, get that. Even the local gas station say, hey, come by Racetrack and fill your tanks before the storm hits. It's always important that you're prepared in this way. Whatever it is, again, we're not modifying because we're not the people that are making the content inside the alert itself. But adjunct to that, we could say that if it's this type of alert, play this spot. And we have that built into our systems to be able to do what we call pre and post. Some of the stuff too is one of those situations where you don't just crash into content with wonk, wonk, wonk. You have a precursor to it that says a pre-audio that says the following was brought to you as a public service of this station. Boom, play the alert. And at the end, you play a spot or something else that might be associated with it. Again, it could be tailored by the type of event, what's going on. It could also be, look at our website. Why aren't we taking, again, the same thing as I talked about multiple arrows in the quiver? Why aren't we taking this content that we get and putting it on our website? We get an alert. Why aren't we taking the alert data and putting it on our website so that people, if they're looking or they're doing anything else, they can say, hey, check our website for more information, and you would have the link to the content. And by the way, that content could be things like what that you may have in a child abduction. So I'll give you the alert that there's a child abduction with a little bit of information about that. But why not have if it's possible, and if the alert agencies do it, we download and store in our box the picture of the child, maybe a picture of the license plate, those kinds of things. There's more content here than I think a lot of people understand, and it can be leveraged in a number of different ways. Again, it's the whole idea of the technology exists to do a lot of other things. We're just not using it.
Well, I think the optimal thing is to get the word out. I'm sure you're trying to do that. And maybe together we can do something.
And I think that coming together with a group of like-minded and intelligent people that you have here. I mean, Rich talked about things like Skywarn. I have to tell you, I mean, my ham radio is alive during hurricanes, and you cannot even imagine the quality of the information that is received over that from not only Skywarn spotters, such as myself, which are educated on what and how to participate in those kinds of things. It's quite a bit different than just social engineering these things and say we're going to have everybody report, because what they're reporting or how they're reporting, how do you scale the size of hail, right? Based on what criteria, those kinds of things, or what really constitutes the type of thing that comes in there. And a lot of the stuff can be curated. I mean, there's various things around it, but in my area, the hurricane stuff and the way when we fire up the Skywarn net, it is absolutely a tremendous thing. I was out of the country during Hurricane Milton, but I left my ham radio, one of my little small portable Baofangs, with my neighbors, and they couldn't believe the information. And so now, as part of their kits, everybody's got at least one of those. They're not transmitting, but they're at least receiving it, so they know and understand. And it's a safety thing on top of that. There's a lot of other stuff that we can do. And I really would love to see more implementation of some of these things coming together.
Does Skywarn have a alert tone?
No, it's basically in our area, it's set up as a net. So you've got a net control officer, if you will, that is responsible to kind of take data in from reporting folks, curate it in some way, or relate it into what locations, other things like that. They keep a running list of activities in different areas, what's happening in case that spotter goes off, and they're able to report. Or if you contact and ask for information in a particular area, they can report on it.
But if they had an FSK tone or something that you could, I don't know, put a fourth input onto a DAS deck?
Well, I wouldn't want to, and I don't know, Rich, in your area, maybe you can speak to this thing. It's not content necessarily in that, but I have to say that if the emergency operations centers have it, and
I'm not saying it's something that you should immediately put on the air, but I'm saying that if with a DAS deck, if a Skywarn alert comes in, it can email out and let the appropriate staff know that there is something important to be listened to.
Now, it requires some human to listen.
Yeah.
Well, use your email address, Rich.
Well, the thing is, it's some good content.
Right. With Skywarn training, you get to learn what clouds to be afraid of.
Yeah, our stuff kind of focuses on that and how to scale hail, so you don't end up and say what size based on a coin. Basically, is it dime? Is it nickel? Is it that kind of stuff? And so it's pretty good to give a reasonable reference.
Right. And, it's the passion of people volunteering, in emergencies.
Yep. So, Barry, I unfortunately have to drop for a bottom of the hour thing. Always appreciate the opportunity. And like Ed had brought up too, if we want to dive into some of these, potential technologies, how it might be used, again, talking about leveraging RDS, about the stuff that we've done in HD radio with vids and graphic elements. ideas of persistence data, persistent data that we can leave up during event types of things. It's all there. It's capable. We can do some other exciting stuff. I, quite frankly, would like to talk more about how to not rewrite the Part 11 rules, but how to update them. How can we add some of the stuff, like I said, the ability to, and this is in the current rules, no one's actually leveraged it, where after the FSK tones on the alert thing, we could add another couple of burps, a couple of other little quick FSK tones that can add other data. Maybe one of them is to validate who sent it. So it's kind of a digital signature type of thing. So you can't, you can't try to take over the airways or something. You validate that. An alert message ID. Barry, you talked about the things with the weather service. We've talked at sometimes about message flooding and everything else. The whole idea is the fact that the alerts are sent, but there's no message ID. If we could add another little blurb with a message ID, we wouldn't necessarily have message flooding. I mean, simple little things that we can do that, by the way, don't disrupt or completely invalidate samey radios out there that weather radios, and we won't have to get rid of them, but we can definitely improve by just doing a few things to say, hey, if this is possible, add this.
Can you do that without acing out the other boxes?
Yeah, exactly.
Why not? Let's do it.
I would love to, if someone would go with it, and I mean, I'd love to do a little presentation on what we call TDX, which is textual data exchange, the way that we can add. And by the way, we've tested it against all of the other EAS encoder decoders. It doesn't disrupt them. It doesn't create a problem. We've tested it against several different weather receivers. It doesn't disrupt them. It doesn't have a problem. But those that have the capability, again, if you have a device that has the ability to listen to that extra little data string and can use it, then why not?
Anybody here want to take Bill up on this? Anybody with a NASDAQ that would like to take care of message flooding or something like that?
Well, Barry, I got to have the other side. I got to get the National Weather Service to send a message ID with it.
Yeah.
But that's it. Again, it's the same thing. Ed spoke to this too about having the local people. Al mentioned it. Having your local SECC talking with your stations, and there's a yin and a yang about this that we have to get through. So you may have
to, in software, label their incoming with a ticket number or something.
Yeah. Well, sure. we do that, but we don't. The way that the EAS protocol is written, it doesn't have that coming from the originator. We can send it with our message, but if we're not the originator, it doesn't count.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Barry, I apologize, folks. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Just more conversations.
We'll see you again. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.